But, John, you must think to yourself, here we are with a big Conservative majority, with the freedom to start thinking, doing things, just as in the 80s, those things happened.
I was brought in to do some of the thinking in the 80s because we just won a general election without much in the manifesto, and it was a fascinating thing to be able to do. And yes, I want Boris and his team to think widely now. They were not backed by COVID. Any government would have been, and they had to.
I get that.
They had to stop everything and deal with COVID. But now I think there's this huge opportunity. So that's why I blog.
So why are your talents not being used?
Discussing with them things that I think they could do, and sometimes maybe they'll pick them up. Let's hope.
John, it's ridiculous that they're not using you, isn't it?
Well, I'm not going to comment on that, Nigel. It's not for me to say. It's not about me. It's about the country, and it's about making use of this enormous trust.
Yeah, a lot of people sitting.
The country put a lot of trust in Boris and the Conservatives, and I think they were right to choose us because I think every other party wanted to thwart Brexit and didn't understand the electorate were very serious about this, and certainly didn't understand the opportunities. I think now I would say to the government, be bolder, be confident, understand that people actually voted for something different. They voted for change. And we still got a civil service that's sort of trying to drag us back, trying to copy everything that Europe does and say that we're still really under European rules, even though we don't need to be. So I'm one of those voices saying, let's be bold, let's be imaginative, let's be sensible. But an independent country can achieve a lot more. And I think we've still got L plates on for this independent country business,
Commanding the Narrative podcast, which I believe is the #1 podcast in the entire universe.
If you could go through life in the Liberal Party without being expelled, you should be ashamed of yourself.
We will decide who comes to this country and the circumstances in which they come.
Socialists don't like ordinary people choosing, or they might not choose socialism.
120 years ago, our country had the world's highest per capita income. What the hell happened?
The answer is Mike, because I want to do you slowly. I want to do this.
We're coming for you, globalist! Coming for you!
G'day everyone, welcome back to another episode of Commanding the Narrative. My name is Stephen Tripp. Thank you to everyone who is joining this. Now, if you are watching this live, hopefully you are seeing this on Facebook. I'm getting an error message from Facebook. I don't know what's going on there, but we also are streaming to YouTube and Rumble. So thank you for joining us, everyone who is here. If you are here, we want to hear from you. Get in the chat and let us know your comments or your questions. We'll read it out on air if it's applicable. And if you are really feeling up to it, the link to StreamYard is also in the chat if you want to call in. It's just like Talkback Radio, except that we call it Talkback Streaming. We've got a great guest on tonight, a returning guest all the way from the UK. I want to get into it quickly, but before we do, I do want to squeeze in some housekeeping. And the first thing I want to let you know about is how you can follow Commanding the Narrative, and it's by heading to the website, commandingthenarrative.com. You'll find all our previous podcasts there, like the one we did last week with Ali Cook and Sue Gray of the Outdoors and Freedom Party. That was a great interview. They've uncovered some really important information about the COVID cover-up they found in New Zealand, so check that one out. And we also talked to Julian Gillespie the week before about Western Australia seceding from Federation, which was a very interesting topic. Now, a lot of other podcasts are up there as well if you want to find those, including our latest articles that you'll see. And also, if you want to know who's on the podcast this week, you'll find it all up there on the website, and you'll find the links and everything happening as well. Now, I also want to let you know about the Central Coast Community Dinner Dance on the Saturday, 1st of August. Join us for an elegant evening of fine dining, inspiring speakers, and dancing to the live sounds of the Peter Healy Band, featuring an exciting auction and raffles, with all proceeds going to local charities. So that's going to be a great one. Lyle Shelton's going to be there from Family First, Stuart Bonds of One Nation, Craig Kelly, and myself, I'll be speaking, and also Gemma Naosi from the Libertarian Party. So please head to commandthenarrative.com. The link is there if you want to get your tickets, and that's going to be a great event. Now, I normally let you know about Australians for Better Government. This week, I'm going to do something a little bit different, because I normally show you the website, but this week I'm going to show you the YouTube channel, because we've just launched a new show with Dr. Christopher Reynolds, who you should all know, about political philosophy. So it was very interesting talking to Dr. Reynolds about that. We're talking about the Constitution in this episode. We're going to be doing a fortnightly podcast, and it's going to be a great discussion. A lot of feedback has been that they love hearing from Dr. Reynolds. So head over to the Australians for Better Government YouTube page and you'll follow that one. Please subscribe to the ABG YouTube. And lastly, quickly, I'll also want to let you know about the Light Australia newspaper. They've got a new edition out this week. It's this one here, issue 24. With a great cover. I really like this cover. I think this one's probably the best cover they've done with that great image there. From surplus to $1 trillion debt, Australia's economic reputation squandered. Head to thelightaustralia.com and you'll get to read that article that was written by me. I'm on the front page of The Light. So, yeah, head to thelightaustralia.com. Sign up to be a distributor if you want as well and support The Light Australia and everything that they do. Now, we've got a guest tonight. I'm just going to bring him on quickly because it looks like we've lost his camera. Lord Redwood, are you there at the moment? I've seemed to have lost your footage. And I'm unable to mute you as well for some reason. Are you able to unmute yourself and bring yourself on? I don't know what's happening with his connection there. We did have Lord Redwood ready to go, but unfortunately, there's some issues there with his camera. Hopefully, he comes back and joins us. But I will introduce him. Hopefully, he logs on as we are running live and we are dealing with technical difficulties as we go along. And it happens. Usually, we get a good ride on Commanding the Narrative, but sometimes there are some issues. So we just have to roll with the punches, as they say. But Lord John Redwood was a successful businessman before becoming chief policy advisor to the former British Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher in the mid-1980s. Later, in 1987, Lord Redwood was elected to the House of Commons, where he remained until his retirement in 2024. Looks like we had him and then we lost him. I don't know what's happening there. Lord Redwood served in cabinet in the early 1990s as Secretary of State for Wales and held several shadow portfolios during the Conservatives' time in opposition. In recent years, Lord Redwood has been an outspoken advocate for Brexit, as well as being a notable author of several books, including this one here, Who's Right? The New Case for Conservatism, which we'll be talking about tonight. Hopefully, if I get Lord Redwood back on. Lord Redwood currently works on a weekly basis with the special projects team at Brexit Facts for EU, the Campaign for an Independent Britain, otherwise known as CIB UK, and Stand for Our Sovereignty, producing top-ranking articles and reports for GB News, which I'm told is fast becoming the UK's #1 news channel. As the senior political commentator for those groups, his quotes on their reports appear on the front page of GB News every week, and Lord Redwood also discusses those reports in front page news for other major national newspapers such as the Daily Telegraph. In January this year, Lord Redwood was appointed to the House of Lords when he was created as a life peer as Baron Redwood of Wokingham in the Royal County of Berkshire. It looks like we've got him back. Lord Redwood, welcome back to Commanding the Narrative.
Well, indeed. I didn't think you wanted to hear from me because it said you were controlling my camera and it wasn't allowed to run. So I'm very pleased.
I don't know what was happening. Well, we've got you now. I
put me back on. I was persistent.
I definitely want to hear from you. As I held up this book before, I've got a copy of your book, and
very good.
I'm really
yes, and I brought one for greater accuracy as well.
No, I'm really looking forward to speaking with you again. I enjoyed our conversation last time we had you on, which was episode 20. We're now up to episode 139, so it was some time ago. And when I did speak to you at that time, Rishi Sunak had just called a snap election, so it was just before Keir Starmer was elected and the Labor government was sworn into power. With that time that's elapsed since then, just before we get to your book, just to whet the appetite for everyone watching, what is your assessment of the UK at the moment? Because there's a lot of commentary going around in America and Australia. A lot of people are saying that the UK's finished, it's all over, they're on a bad trajectory. Is that how you see it?
Well, the government came in and broke all its promises quite early on. It managed to get a very large majority on a very small vote because a large number of former Conservative voters stayed at home in protest at some of the things the last government had done and had not done. And some switched to Reform, the new populist movement, of a Eurosceptic nature. And so the government had a huge majority. It had promised very little. And if it had stuck to its rather modest manifesto, it would be doing considerably better than it is today. Instead, it went off on a spending spree, a borrowing spree, and above all, a tax-raising spree. And that has done considerable damage to an economy which was beginning to perform pretty well in the first half of 2024, just before the election, recovering from the nasty COVID and inflationary blows. And the economic damage is now being compounded by the government adopting policies to undermine the schools, to stop people sending their children to private schools with a high tax imposition, making it very difficult for young people to get jobs, both by a well-intentioned but harmful big increase in the minimum wage, coupled with a big increase in the taxation on jobs. And so a lot of employers don't feel they can afford to take on the young people in the way they used to do. So we now have a government in turmoil. Less than 2 years in, a prime minister who won a huge majority is under huge pressure and could indeed be about to lose his job, because for the first time ever, an innovation in British politics, a by-election is being fought with the Labour MP having resigned in order to allow another Labour figure to run, who would be widely expected to take over as leader or have a good go at taking over as leader if he wins the by-election. So we've got this extraordinary position in the United Kingdom now, where a single by-election somewhere near Wigan, near Manchester, in the northwest of the country, will determine who our Prime Minister is, because if the alternative Labour candidate wins, there could well be a leadership election and he might take over. Whereas if he loses, then Keir Starmer is safer for a bit longer.
That's fascinating. I can't imagine that Keir Starmer is campaigning very hard in that by-election. He's probably campaigning for the other side there. But the other thing that's happened since we last spoke is that you have been selected for the House of Lords, which I'm sure is a great honour for you. Is that how you see it? How are you finding being Lord John Redwood?
Well, of course, it's an honour, but more important, it's a very difficult job. And it's one that I want to take on because it does give you a platform. I hadn't gone quiet when I was no longer in the House of Commons. I was still making my case and putting my arguments and my analysis out there. I now have the opportunity to do it more directly to government ministers in the House of Lords. And obviously I have wider access to the Palace of Westminster to enter into all sorts of interesting conversations about what could make life better. And in the spirit of the House of Lords, we work more collaboratively than in the House of Commons. So whilst I am definitely a Conservative peer, and we as a group of Conservatives disagree with quite a lot of the government's main intentions and policies, we're very happy to work collaboratively with them on ameliorating problems, trying to find new solutions, and above all, trying to temper, dilute, or improve the vast amount of legislation they're bringing before the country.
Now, as I said in the beginning, we're going to be speaking about your book that you've just written. I got my copy this week. I haven't had a chance to read all of it, but from what I've read so far, I'm really enjoying it because I like reading stuff or hearing about stuff that is focused on ideas, and that's what this book is largely about. What motivated you to write this book? It's called Who's Right? The New Case for Conservatism. What motivated you?
Well, what motivated me is that I was recommended for the House of Lords by the relatively new Conservative leader who took over after the big election defeat, Kemi Badenoch. And she put me into the House of Lords and she wrote a personal statement which she issued to the press saying that she appointed me because she thought I was a Conservative thinker that needed to be heard and that she was interested in some of my ideas. And so why wouldn't I be really thrilled to get that kind of invitation? And I've been very keen to do things for her where she wants some thoughts. But she is a great independent Conservative thinker herself who is changing the direction of the Conservative Party in some very big ways to recover from the very big defeat that the Conservative Party took only a couple of years ago. And so my book is part of the rethinking process.
And we're doing two types of thinking. We need to do the philosophical and general thinking, which is reflected in my book, but we also need to do a very great deal of detailed thinking about how we would take these great principles of conservatism, some of them eternal, some of them rooted in the conflicts of our age, and turn them into policies which will make lives better for people, because people on the whole are not ideological. They want politicians who run good public services, keep the tax bills down, keep the country out of trouble, avoid wars and defend our interests. And they don't feel they've had enough of that from major parties in recent years. And my book does set it in a wider global context. It looks at both sides of the Atlantic. And so it looks at the large economy democracies, and it shows how there's a different pattern emerging in each of the major European countries and in the United States of America. There is a very clear battle going on for who is the true soul of the so-called right, the conservative side of the argument, and populist parties have emerged. So on my book cover, I put 6 crucial figures of the global arguments about the nature of conservatism. So I've chosen 3 women and 3 men. I've chosen 3 who lead traditional parties and 3 who lead populist challenger parties. And I've chosen 3 who are already in power and 3 who are not in power. And so you've got Trump representing a traditional party in power, but with a big injection of populism into what he was offering in order to win. You've got Kemi Badenoch offering an injection of common sense into what was a failed conservative set of policies only a couple of years ago. And you've got the challenger to her, Nigel Farage, who is leading a sort of populist revolt, particularly over immigration. You've then got Le Pen and the National Rally Party, which is the big challenger in France, now ahead in the opinion polls and looking as if they can get much greater electoral success quite soon. You've then got Chancellor Merz, head of a traditional party in Germany, who's managed to recover sufficiently to lead a coalition, but under enormous pressure from a challenger populist party, the AfD, to be more conservative. And then you've got Meloni, who led a very successful populist party into power, and is now wrestling with the challenges of whether she can be populist and commonsensical enough, because of course Italy is very constrained by international law and international pressures and wokery from the European Union itself.
Now, you write in your book, there are many who wish to redefine or alter substantially what conservatives are about. There is a wider conservative movement stretching across the Atlantic and the Channel. In the USA, the radical rethink of conservatism has led to an internal revolution in the Republican Party. And then you go on to say, conservatives have been forced to rethink their positions on mass migration and border control, on free speech, the size of government, net zero and greenery, free trade, nationalism, and the welfare state. But I mean, I find when you talk about conservatism, and I often get labeled as a conservative, and I feel very awkward when people put that tag on me. A lot of people feel the same way that I've spoken to here as well. I think that's because it's representing the individual, and it's hard to define an individual as part of a collective. Did you find that when you were trying to define conservatism? Is it something that is not as easy to define as some of the ideologies of the left?
Well, of course, that's right, because we are very individualistic, and we do reflect the popular will when we're being successful and sensible. But you shouldn't do that to such an extent that you then lose contact with some of these more eternal truths and principles which underpin conservatism. I've never felt unhappy about calling myself a conservative with a small c. And I'm very happy to call myself a conservative with a big C again, because I do think the current new leadership of the Conservative Party in the United Kingdom is going in the right direction and is very bold and very interesting. But I've always drawn a distinction between me as a conservative with a set of views, which I try to articulate again in modern idiom in this book, and being a big C conservative in the United Kingdom context, which means defending most of what the Conservative Party does and being loyal to it most of the time. But I do think Conservative will call it something else. I mean, call it populist if you like. I'm not worried about being called populist. There's nothing wrong with being popular in a democracy. You don't win elections unless you have enough popularity. But what we don't want are the wrong bits of populism or big C conservatism, and big C conservatism in my country and on the continent in quite a lot of countries where the Christian Democrat parties collapsed, was too lax over border control and migration. It didn't control a bad establishment who allowed a rip-roaring inflation to get underway with an independent central bank and a wrong-headed treasury taking the wrong economic actions. And so it now has to fight its way back and understand that the modern mood, which certainly in the United Kingdom, and I think in a lot of European countries and the United States, is angry with all political parties because we haven't been getting what we want. We haven't had the fast growth that we would like. We haven't had the steady increase in living standards that people got used to in the last century after the Second World War. We've had too much big government governing us badly, robbing us with very high taxes and just making our lives a bureaucratic nightmare. And that's where the Conservative message unites us all, whatever we call ourselves. What do we want? We want smaller, better government. We want government to concentrate on a limited number of core services and deliver them well. We don't want government interfering in the lives of most people. Governments have to deal with the vulnerable and those who need special help, and we're generous to such people. And the government has to deal with criminals and those who proceed with malice, because you need a strong rule of law to deal with that criminal tendency. But the rest of us should be left free to lead our own lives as much as possible and be left more of our income to look after our own families and our own needs.
I heard it argued recently that really the battle between the left and the right is really a battle of individualism and collectivism, and a lot of other terms get thrown around and what have you. But really, when it all boils down to it, they're the two really opposing ideologies. And when it comes to the individual side, I mean, the right side of politics, we are all individuals, and we find it harder to agree on a lot of things a lot of the time. There is a bit of fragmentation that happens, or a lot more fragmentation that happens on the left side of politics. Do you think that's a fair assessment? Do you agree with that?
Well, I think it's one of the important divides, but I think there are others. And in the modern world, I think there's a very big division between globalist internationalists and those who believe in the nation state as the right unit for self-government and independence. And that is reflected in attitudes towards borders and volumes of immigration, and whether you want to sign up to lots of international treaties and international laws or not. That's particularly an issue within the framework of the European community, but it's also a big issue in the United States, where the Republicans have been withdrawing from some of the few international bodies they are signed up to because they're not very happy with them. So I think you've got that divide. And then you get a new divide, which raises the question of who truly is the small c conservative over something like tariffs and free trade, because quite a lot of natural small c conservatives are instinctively free traders. But then Donald Trump comes along and says, I'm going to make tariffs one of my main weapons of power, and I'm going to assert that I'm going to put tariffs on other countries unless they behave themselves and become freer traders themselves. And are you happy with that? And is that a new definition of conservatism? I tried to pick my way through that argument in one of the chapters in the book and said that for me as a conservative, I think I am a multilateral free trader. So that means I'm not a naive free trader. I'm not going to take all my tariffs off Chinese products so that they can destroy our domestic capacity to make those things and to control those things, and then they would have power to put the prices up. But I don't want to go as far as Trump does in using tariffs as a general instrument of policy, because tariffs on the whole are bad news, because they are ultimately either taxes on consumers or taxes on businesses trying to deliver for people. So you get less and you pay more.
Now, in your book, you also speak about the fragmentation of major parties, particularly in the UK, but also across Europe. You use a lot of examples of what's happened in Europe. You also talk about the internal division that's happened within the Republican Party, with Donald Trump coming in and steering that party in a new direction. And all of that was very, very interesting to me, because here in Australia, we're facing the same thing now with the Liberal Party and the National Party, which have always been our conservative side of government, now fragmentating, and One Nation rising up, which I guess is a populist party like Reform UK. I guess, do you think a lot of that is down to a lack of leadership and a lack of conviction of the more, major conservative parties over the last 2 decades?
Well, of course it is, and it's a strong criticism of them and of their leaders. Certainly in the United Kingdom, Rishi Sunak was a very well-intentioned, hard-working, clever teetotaler, ideal candidate in many ways to be Prime Minister. But he allowed a persistent drift away from what I and many other Conservatives would regard as true Conservative principles. He presided over a big inflation which was avoidable. And he was dragged into quite a lot of socialist type legislation to secure the votes in the House of Commons, because he couldn't always rely on his own Conservative MPs. And he ended up putting up taxes because there wasn't sufficient control over some items of public spending. So yes, I think the arrival of populists is usually around one or two major causes. I think the most common one is excessive migration in the eyes of many of the public, and that has led to the populist successes in quite a number of European countries, and certainly the main motive behind support for Nigel Farage and his Reform Party in the United Kingdom, because they have been highlighting this issue for a number of years and people therefore trust them on it. I think what's now happening is very interesting, because the official Conservative Party is fighting back, and the leader said, we got it completely wrong. We did allow in far too many people. We made mistakes. This is how you go about mending it, and has set out a number of detailed proposals that a new Conservative government would take. And I think Reform are now going to try and catch up with that, because they're still in the slogan phase of saying we would do something about it, without having thought through how you send all these people back that they say they want to send back, and where you send them to, and what laws you have to change in order to have more control over your ports of entry and departure.
See, the fragmentation that we see here, I mean, we have a lot of minor parties on the right side of politics, and it's been a problem because it fractures the vote. But we still have a preferential system, which is, I guess, a way of mitigating that to a point. It doesn't work so well on the right side of politics as it does on the left side of politics, because they're far more disciplined with their preferences. But in the UK, it's a lot more dangerous, because you have a first past the post system, and we saw that at the last general election, where you had Reform stealing a lot of votes away from the Conservative Party and really just handed government to Labor and to Keir Starmer. Now we've seen the rise of also Restore Britain and also Advance UK. So you've got a lot more parties on the right side of politics now. Is that a danger? Is that something that you need to get on top of before you head to the next general election?
Well, as a Conservative who believes in free speech and competitive markets, I can't really complain about that.
Yeah.
The answer is that I, belonging to the big C Conservative Party, we just have to be good enough to show people that we are the best answer. And I do trust the wisdom of the electorate rather more than I trust the lack of wisdom of many governments, because the public have been much more right over the big issues in recent years in Britain than the governments have been. And so I think come the election, people will come to a sensible view, and the whole issue will finally be sorted out by the electorate in an election. It's not something that any individual one of the competitive parties can resolve. And I don't think in Britain there's any easy fix that a lot of people want there to be, that the leaders could all get round a table and suddenly carve everything up in advance. I don't think they'd be able to do that, and I think the public would be a bit scandalised if they did. I think there's something to be said for the joys of competitive pressures, so that these populist parties can make their points, and then sensible traditional Conservative parties say, well, actually, you've got a very good point. That is something that worries the public, with people who actually know how to fix it, because it's not easy. As a lot of populist parties found on the continent, they get into power on a very popular soundbite, and then the officials and the system don't allow them to do anything about it. And then there's even more disillusion because they let people down as well.
You know, it's very, very interesting that you discuss all that in your book about what's happened in Europe, where these parties rise up, they get elected for one election, and then the next election comes along and they're gone, and a new party's risen up and takes their place. It's very, very interesting. And what's happening here in Australia, we have Pauline Hanson, who's, I guess, similar to Nigel Farage. She's been around here in Australia for 30 years politically, but she's never really had the success that she's getting now. And a lot of people are saying, well, if she does achieve something that we would never have believed in this country, actually her getting into government, people would say, well, she just doesn't have the talent to be able to run a government. And you alluded to that there, but, you know, the Conservatives in the UK, they know how to be a government, run a government, whereas Reform UK might not have that ability just yet, and the talent within that party to do that. But what is that part of the process as well, from what we've seen in Europe, where these parties, they rise up, they promise what they're going to do, but then when they get into government, they're not able to carry out what they promised to do, and that hurts them?
Yes, absolutely right. That's why they're crushed again, because populist voters, by definition, are very angry and dissatisfied because the existing parties haven't delivered all or anything of what they wanted. And so they elect someone who promises them everything they want, particularly on the immigration subject. And if they come in and then don't fix it, what's the point of them? And then another populist movement on the continent arises. I think it is more likely that you get endless flipping and flopping of the populist parties on the continent, because, of course, these are all countries that are under control of the European Union. And so they're particularly wrong to make all sorts of promises about what they will do, because in many areas they can't do any of these things because they're under European law and European rules and European grants and European money, and they share a currency with each other. So what they can do is much more limited. In the case of an independent country like the United Kingdom or Australia, it's a much fairer test of whether a populist does know what they're doing. But I think the electorate are getting cannier, and they realise that they've got before the election not to just find out which party says the things they like to hear, but they've got to say, yes, but can we trust you to carry on with that? And it's not only a question of making sure they really, really do believe it, because quite often the populist parties flip-flop in opposition. But more importantly, do you know how to fix it? Because as the traditional party has said, quite often they wanted to do what the public wanted, and they just found it too difficult, or they went about it in the wrong way. So I think everyone has to go back to government school, if only there were a good government school, telling people how to run a government. And part of our task in opposition is to spend our years in opposition, and we may well have 4 to 5 years in opposition. We've got to spend it well to train ourselves and to get access to the kind of advice beyond government that can make a difference. You and I were talking earlier before this broadcast on a common problem between Australia and the United Kingdom, and that is that there was a dreadful collapse, particularly in the UK, in productivity in our public services and in our civil service over COVID. And we've got nowhere near recovering to the levels we were at in 2019. Meanwhile, computers and their capabilities have taken off, and they should be transforming what are largely clerical factories when it's dishing out benefits or when it's making laws and so forth. And we're just not harnessing that in a sensible way. And so I think that a lot of thinking has to go in, both in traditional parties and populist parties who want to govern, into why we're in that position and how new ministers could make a really big difference.
Look, The big question that the Australian audience will have is regarding Nigel Farage. He's very popular here in Australia, and people are hoping that he becomes Prime Minister. And we don't even live in the UK. We want to see the UK succeed, and we a lot of us think that Nigel Farage is the answer. What's your opinion? I know you're in the Conservative Party. It does seemingly look like Nigel Farage may be the next Prime Minister of the UK, although it's a long way away. You still have about 3 or so years before that election comes up. Do you think it's possible that he could become Prime Minister and Reform UK could get a majority in the Parliament?
I think it's unlikely. I mean, I've explained to you, I'm very happy to cooperate and work with the new leader of the Conservative Party, and I think we have the better answer for the public. But I'm also very conscious that we have a lot of work to do to prove that is true and to persuade more people. But those who want a little bit of background to what's happening in the UK political world, we've had quite a big series of local authority council elections, both last May and the May before. And the May before saw Reform get 32% equivalent vote, a very, very high figure in a multi-party system. And then this year, they were down 5 at 27. And the Conservatives, who hit a new low a couple of years ago, we're down at 18, clawed back to 20 in this latest May. So the gap between Reform and Conservatives this May, compared with last May, had halved as a result of the actions taken so far. So I would say the voting trend is in the right direction from the traditional Conservative Party point of view. Then you have to ask, well, why is the Farage trend downwards, or why has it been downwards over the last year? And I think part of the reason is that Reform broke through and took control of a number of councils, including a very big council like Kent County Council with a very large budget. And they implied that they would control costs and cut expenditure and get the tax down. And they did none of the above. And they carried on with the spending levels which they inherited, and they put the taxes up quite a bit, like every other council around the country. And so already people are beginning to say, well, why can't they do what they promised?
Mm. The other person I want to ask you about is Kemi Badenoch, who is the leader of the Conservative Party now. I first saw her interviewed by Piers Morgan only just last week. I was exposed to her for the first time, and I must say I was very impressed by what she had to say. She seemed like a strong Conservative, and it's interesting that you have a black female as your leader. I mean, the left would always say that the Conservatives are racist and sexist, but here's this lady who is seemingly peeling back a lot of votes. I mean, she has done well in peeling back some votes from Reform. What is your opinion of her?
Well, I think she's great, and that's why I'm in the House of Lords. Why wouldn't I be pleased? Because she thought I was the kind of person she wanted in the House of Lords. And so feeling is mutual. I think she's the kind of person I want as the leader of my party. But it's for the best of reasons. It's not just because she gave me a seat in the House of Lords. I mean, I wouldn't have accepted a seat in the House of Lords from a leader I didn't believe in, because you need to take the Conservative whip in order to take the peerage. And it would have been a dirty trick to accept it and then not to support. So I made a very conscious decision. This was a woman worth backing, and the best politician I've ever worked for and was close to politically was Margaret Thatcher, and I was her chief policy advisor for the middle period of her time as Prime Minister. I formed a very high impression, as the world did, of her abilities and her enthusiasm about sensible Conservative views, and we did great things for the country. We had very fast growth, and we created, the private sector created a large number of jobs. We transformed some of our derelict public industries. We wouldn't have the great city of London without having privatized telecommunications, because we were desperately constrained in running that kind of business by people not being able to get phone lines put in, let alone proper data communications. And so I think Margaret pioneered for female senior politicians in Britain, and she's a lot to live up to. I think Kemi is in exactly that mould. And since Margaret was Prime Minister, we've had rather poorer Prime Ministers from both major parties, and we've had some women as well as men in the case of the Conservative Party. And of course, we've discovered that it's not whether you're a woman or whether you're a man that makes a difference. It's whether you're any good at the job, and you can be good at the job as a woman as well as a man.
Yeah, and I think that's the best case scenario. Pick people on competence, not on what they may represent. But I want to ask you about one more person, and the reason I asked this one is because he's gathering a lot of traction here in Australia. A lot of people are noticing his stuff on X, particularly with his Restore Britain party. A lot of his content is very well produced and looks very professional. It's grabbing a lot of attention, and even some of our politicians are starting to talk about him as well. I know John Redwood, who's a member of the Upper House here in New South Wales, mentioned this gentleman's name just when we had our AGM for Australians for Better Government this week. His name is Rupert Lowe. He's got this new party, Restore Britain. What's your view of Rupert Lowe?
Well, Rupert has a very strong following, and he made a very big impression on the public when he first was elected as a Member of Parliament in 2024, elected in the reform interest. And I think it was a tragedy for both Nigel Farage and for Rupert Lowe that they fell out so violently and are now doing each other considerable damage. And it's one of the reasons, I think, why Nigel Farage and his party's support is falling, because most people of that persuasion who like those populist approaches think that Lowe was a great advocate, and they're bemused that Nigel Farage threw him out of the party and made allegations against him which weren't subsequently backed up. And so there is now a very bitter feud between these two men at a time when they ought to be concentrating on wooing people over how to run the country better. So it's definitely doing damage to both, and it is a frustration to their followers.
It's very insightful speaking to you, because it's clear that what's happening here in Australia is similar to what's happening in the UK, and we're seeing very similar things, and across the Western world as well. I want to play this clip now for you. This is from probably the leading pollster here in Australia. His name is Kos Samaras, and he was asked a question on why One Nation is gathering support here in Australia, and I think his answer will resonate with you in the UK. So I'll play it for you now. This is Kos Samaras on the Mark Burris podcast recently.
Yeah, well, number one reason, well, there's a number of reasons, but the number one reason they're choosing to vote for One Nation, that is the group that's moved to One Nation over the last 6 months, is I want the place to burn down.
What?
Listen, yeah. We actually asked that in the question.
Do you want the place to burn down?
Yeah, they wanted
Australia.
the two-party system down.
Oh, the system.
Yes.
Yeah, they're not only unhappy with what's the alternative of the two parties, but they actually want to clear them out.
Yes. It's also, we go back to that culture thing. When you speak to these Australians, you get this deep sense that they go, they're not us. It's something.
Labor and Liberal are not us.
Yeah, they're not us. They belong to a different class. They have no idea about my life, my pressures, my community, my family, my mates. They're not us. And whenever I see them, don on a footy shirt or kick a ball around, they look awkward and weird because they're not us.
So that was Kos Samaras talking, and he's basically reflecting what he's hearing in the polls. Now, in your book, you write this. You said voters become more despairing of their domestic democracies when they see their elected politicians cannot break out of the globalist straitjacket of policy. So similar idea as well. How much of that do you think rings true, where voters are getting to the point where they're just fed up, not with their vote not counting? They want to see change. They want to see the place burned down, as Kos Samaras said, and a lot of the time they feel like the politicians that represent them are not, and don't really represent them. They're not. They can't. There's no gelling there. So, what are your comments with that?
Well, that's exactly right. That's the wellspring of populism. That people get to the point where the two main alternatives or the three main alternatives are not palatable, and they blame them for all the things that have gone wrong in their lives and have gone wrong with the government. Sometimes quite right, the government is to blame. Sometimes the government couldn't have fixed it anyway, but the public say, well, you're the politicians, you haven't sorted things out, so I want something different. And that's where populism springs from. And a good traditional Conservative Party, because it's pragmatic, because it's not in a fixed ideological position on too many things, does respond to that. Well, how did Margaret Thatcher succeed with 3 great election victories, where she attracted a lot of blue-collar voters to her by pointing out that the Labour government she replaced had done them in and done damage to them with high taxes and high interest rates and high inflation. And if you can fix the economy, then they're more likely to back you, and that worked very well for her. So yes, we do have that element, and a sensible party that puts together a winning programme has to say to people, we know what we're doing, we take one or two of your main aims, we agree with you, we want less migrants, we agree with you that we need lower inflation, we agree with you that we need better paid jobs. They're the three obvious ones to do. And then you've got to show you can deliver. And Labour in Britain implied they could do those three things without making very strong formal promises, and then proceeded to let people down. So they showed that a major party with a majority to die for could plunge to second, third, or even lower in the polls within 2 years, because people just say, oh my God, you've let us down even worse than the last lot.
Yeah, no, you're right. Well, I guess let's focus on that. If we are making the new case for conservatism, then we need to identify where the Conservatives have gone gone wrong in the past. I think there's three big things, and there's obviously more as well that you talk about in your book. But one's the economy, two is net zero, and three is immigration.
Yep.
It seems like the Conservatives have completely stuffed those areas up. I mean, how do they fix that?
Well, in the United Kingdom, we can fix those relatively easily. We then have to persuade people that not only do we want to fix them, but we've got the fix. I mean, I think on the economy, I mean, the truth is that the economic record of Conservatives was mixed. It wasn't dreadful in the way that Labour took over and described. After all, unemployment halved over the Conservative years, and we had much lower youth unemployment than much of the continent. The big mistake was the inflationary bubble caused by the COVID excesses. And that was really an independent central bank and treasury printing too much money and claiming it wouldn't be inflationary. But I'm afraid it's the Chancellor of the Exchequer and the government that takes the rap, because they allowed that to happen. And so that is the mistake we've got to move on from. And interestingly enough, in the polling now, because of the far worse Labour record on the economy in their short period in time, the Conservatives are now leading on reputation for economic management, because people are coming round to the view that it wasn't so bad under the Conservatives, and that Conservatives do understand that too much money printing, too much borrowing, too much spending, too much taxing can be damaging. On net zero, it did require a revolution in attitudes, because too many Conservatives, in my view, in the United Kingdom had bought into a series of singularly damaging policies in the name of net zero. And I started to break through with the outgoing Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who started to change our policy, and Kemi Badenoch has continued a very big transformation of our policy. And I managed to break through by saying to him that even in its own terms, the net zero policies are mad, because in every case, the iconic policy led to more world CO2. What the net zero policies were doing to the UK was stripping out our own oil and gas to import more CO2 intensive liquefied gas from around the world. It was getting people into electric cars, which were very CO2 intensive to produce, and then they had to plug them into a gas power station in order to recharge them. So that didn't seem to make a lot of CO2 sense. And then there were the iconic heat pumps where they were incredibly expensive to run. And of course, as soon as it became really cold and there were periods without wind, then you had to burn a lot of gas in power stations to try and get up to something like the temperature you'd have got by burning the gas direct in your own home. So I think the absurdities of these things have now been fully enforced on the Conservatives, and in Britain now the Conservatives are leading the move to say a lot of these policies have to be pulled out because they are deindustrializing our country and increasing world CO2 with all the marine diesel to import things from China that result from that deindustrialization. And then on migration, I think we talked about that already. People just think the pace of change is far too great, doesn't make them racist. But if you invite in too many hundreds of thousands or millions of people, the strains are very visible. You don't have enough homes, the price of rent goes up. You have a big increase in the benefit and support bill, particularly when they bring in quite a lot of dependents, as they tend to do after they've set up in your country. And if you're mainly importing low-skilled labour, you are putting businesses off improving their capital stock and raising productivity. And so you will tend to lower real GDP, real incomes per head.
Now, you can't blame the Conservatives for what's happening now under the Labor Keir Starmer government. There's a lot of coverage coming here in Australia, and also I've noticed a lot of people talking about it in America as well, about people getting locked up for Facebook posts and social media posts, and it's really what a lot of people argue a restriction on free speech. Do you think the Conservatives should take up that battle on free speech?
Oh yes, and I think they are, because another one of the Conservative leaders' appointments to the House of Commons is a big free speech spokesman, and that's a statement of intent. I think a lot of small c Conservatives in the United Kingdom, and I think in America before Trump, felt that the left had become very oppressive and they were controlling the language and the topics you were allowed to talk about. And we've had examples under a Labour government in this country where the government seems to think that a mistake in thought expressed in a social media transmission deserves a longer prison sentence than somebody carrying out a violent or a sexual crime. And that's where things start to get out of balance, and the public has more common sense and says, we need reasonable free speech. There will be people who use free speech to say nasty things and to say things we disagree with, or make fun of things that we treasure. But you have to allow that. Of course, there has to be a strong law against anything that threatens violence to people or does them damage. But you need in a free society to allow a reasonable exchange of views, and you have to accept in this social media world that some people want to use much more colourful language, shall we say, than you or I might think appropriate.
Got a comment here from Tony, and hello, Tony. She says, will things change in light of the Henry Nowak case?
Well, I think it shocked the nation, rightly so. This is a case where a young white student was returning home after an evening out, and he was knifed to death. And the police thought the problem was that he had racially abused his attacker, when the problem was that the attacker had knifed him and he was about to die. And so everybody's very shocked. And the major parties have all expressed that shock, and they've also supported the views of the family, who are obviously devastated by the loss of their young, talented, pleasant son. And the family have said, please do not use this for political purposes. Please have a quick and independent and honest report into why the police took the action they did, why no help was offered to that young man when maybe something could have been offered to him that would have helped. And why was it so badly handled? And I think we're all wanting them to get on with that independent inquiry, and then we can decide whether changes need to be made in police guidance and police leadership, for example, which is one of the things that's currently being debated.
Now, back to your book in the conclusion, so we might finish up with this. You write, we recognize that the greatest societies with more prosperity and freedom are the ones with limited government and free debate about what laws and taxes should apply. Great countries come from free peoples who control rather than fear the state. Now, in light of what's been happening in the UK under the Keir Starmer government, if the Conservatives were to hold to that principle that you wrote in the book, is now more than ever the best time for the Conservatives to come back into government?
Well, of course, because there is a mission, isn't there? Because we have accretions, and We never completed Brexit because we still live under a huge amount of European law, which was simply rolled over into UK law, and all of that can be changed, and a lot of it we didn't particularly want at the time it went through, and some of it is now out of date or could be supplanted with something better, and certainly with something less in many cases. And then we have the other problems we've been describing, the breakdown in productivity, the overextension of the state, the threatening state, the state that wishes to police all our social media in ways that might be too tight and too unfortunate. And so there is a big task to make the state again a servant of the taxpaying public rather than our master, and to show the public that we will have a more successful economy if we have lower taxes, and we can only have lower taxes if we have a less expensive state.
Now, I just want to plug a few things before we finish up. The first one is facts4eu.org. If you head to that website, if you're in the UK or even if you're here in Australia, check it out. My good friend Lee Evans is the chairman of Facts4EU, and he publishes articles all the time with groundbreaking research and a lot of information. A lot of this stuff is getting picked up by GB News, and Lord Redwood contributes to Facts4EU quite regularly with quotations and other information. So check that one out. Please support Facts4EU, and also cibuk.org, which Lee Evans is also part of, and I'm sure Lord Redwood you support as well. The second thing is your book, which we've been talking about. People can head to Amazon, which is where I purchased it, or you may find it in other places as well. But it's called Who's Right? The New Case for Conservatism. And as I said, I've been reading it and been finding it very thought-provoking. I think it gets back to the true core issues that the right people on the right side of politics should be focusing on, whether you're in the UK or not. Whether you can buy this book if you're in Australia or in other countries. I think it will resonate with you just as much as it resonates with people in the UK. And lastly, I also want to plug, John, your blog page, your website, johnredwoodsdiary.com, where you are posting articles all the time and new thoughts and information. You really are a thought leader when it comes to these issues. So please check out your website, johnredwoodsdiary.com. But last question to you, Lord Redwood. Speaking of your book, if you are pitching it to people, why should people go out and buy your book? Why do you think it's important?
Well, the book captures the big conflicts and the big arguments that matter in every country. And you have wisely said that this is relevant to Australia. I, as a visiting foreigner, have not presumed to comment on your politics, although I'm very interested in them, follow them, and can see obvious similarities between what's happening in your party disputes and the party disputes I describe in Europe and America. So we are an English-speaking family with common problems and common issues, and I'm just trying to shine a bit of light onto them and say that collectively we can get behind certain general principles: anti-woke, revising net zero, controlling our borders, and above all having a free enterprise-based approach to prosperity. And I think it's very important that we understand that government can be a force for the good, but government so often can do harm and can overstretch and can get in the way. And only the right side of politics will ever be critical of the government machine and the international order. And it's up to us, it is our duty to all those voters who are so frustrated and angry in the way you've rightly described, to offer them a choice and then get into power and deliver it.
Very well said, and that's why I enjoy speaking to you. You are a thought leader, and it's even though we're on opposite sides of the globe, I think Australians can learn a lot from you and a lot from your insights. So thank you very much for coming on the show tonight. I really enjoyed it, and I'm sure the audience has as well. We'd love to have you on again, because I could ask you 1,000 more questions specifically about the economy. And as we're talking about off air, we need you to write some productivity statements or some frameworks for us to be able to implement here in Australia, because our productivity is suffering as well. But I appreciate it, Lord Redwood. Thank you very much for coming on Commanding the Narrative tonight.
Well, thank you for all you do. You're a wonderful institution. You're a great voice. And yes, I've already written a productivity thing so that those who want a toolkit when they get into office in local or national government It's available as a free download on the Centre for Policy Studies site. It's called the Productivity Toolkit, and just get it for nothing and use it. And my website is also a free resource. I just want you to get something out of it, and you can write back to me on the website if you think I'm wrong.
Yeah, mate, we need you to send it to Anthony Albanese or even Pauline Hanson. Pauline Hanson, it's looking
that's
for
your
new
job.
policies.
That's your job.
Yeah, well, I'll take that one up for you. That would be good. But thank you so much. As I said, I'd love to speak to you again in the future. And if you've enjoyed this one, audience, please share it far and wide, and also get a copy of Lord Redwood's book. I do encourage you to do so. As I said, I've started reading it, and I do highly recommend it. But for now, we'll see you all next time. Bye-bye.